Welcome to Essentially Soulful. I'm Betty, and today we're exploring how life's challenges can open doors to unexpected discoveries. I'm talking with DeeAnna, whose journey from singer to spiritual guide is nothing short of remarkable. DeeAnna, thank you for being here. You've had such a fascinating path, from singing on stage to finding a completely different voice. Could you take us back to where this journey began?
Thank you, Betty. For most of my life, my voice was everything. I lived and breathed music, performing at an early age, deciding to become a voice major in college, and being fortunate to learn from highly successful musicians. Even when I decided not to continue with my music education, pursuing a counseling career instead, music was my creative outlet. Singing was my pulse. But then came the day that changed everything. The day I opened my mouth to sing and the melody was not to be heard. That's the day I put my music down. It was devastating. What I didn't know then was that this loss would lead me to discover something far more profound.
That must have been incredibly challenging. What happened next?
Well, it turned out I had a thyroid tumor. But what's fascinating isn't just the medical journey. It's how this challenge began, opening my eyes even further to what Carl Jung calls synchronicity. These meaningful coincidences that seem to be guiding me toward healing this particular wound.
Could you explain a bit more about synchronicity? I think many of our listeners might be familiar with coincidences, but maybe not this deeper concept.
Of course, synchronicities are what we might call meaningful coincidences, where outer events align with our inner experiences. It's not just random, there's a sense of significance, a feeling that the universe is trying to tell us something.
Can you share an example from the experience of losing your singing voice?
I showed up on another podcast. It's Soul Portals, and I am the co-host. I like to say I'm the sidecar to Cedric. On that day, our guest was a musician and music therapist. She shared her love of music, her journey, a recent track on her new album, and her experience with clients. It all resonated. Her voice took me back. It was stirring, but do I dare say, a bit uncomfortable. And then, that same afternoon, I saw a bumper sticker in front of me. It said, "I love music therapy."
That was like a kickstart to the healing you knew needed to happen, the grief you were experiencing having lost your ability to sing.
Exactly. It's like tuning a radio to the right frequency. Once you're aware and open to these moments, they seem to multiply. It's similar to when you buy a red car and suddenly notice red cars everywhere. Not every noticeable synchronicity necessarily has deep meaning. Sometimes it's just a nudge from the universe letting you know you are on your path. But this one, I love music therapy, well, you can't make that up.
Had you already been paying attention to these meaningful coincidences prior to the bumper sticker moment? How did you start developing this awareness more intentionally?
Yes, I began keeping what I call a synchronicity journal. Every day, I'd write down these meaningful coincidences, no matter how small they seemed. It's amazing how this simple practice helped me recognize patterns I was missing before.
Could you walk us through how someone might start their own synchronicity journal? What should they look for?
The key is to start with an open mind. Notice when something makes you pause and think, what are the chances? It could be a friend calling right when you're thinking about them, or repeatedly seeing certain numbers or symbols. Write down not just what happened, but how it made you feel and what was going on in your life at that time. The connections often become clear when you look back at your entries.
I love how practical this approach is. You're essentially creating a dialogue with these meaningful moments. Looking back at your own journey, how did this practice help you process the loss of your singing voice?
That's a beautiful way to put it, Betty. Through journaling about this particular synchronicity, I started seeing how losing my singing voice was actually guiding me toward finding a different kind of voice, one that could deepen how I help others recognize these spiritual breadcrumbs in their own lives.
I'm curious about the transformation you mentioned, from singing voice to spiritual voice. Was there a particular moment when you realized this shift was happening?
Yes, it was during my healing process. I started noticing that whenever I felt most discouraged about my voice, something would appear. A book falling open to the perfect page, a chance encounter with someone who'd been through something similar. These weren't just coincidences anymore. Mind you, I was already embracing spirituality in my personal and professional life as a healer, teacher, and writer, but this experience was about healing my own wound. And whenever we take the opportunity to heal a wound, our light shines brighter for others.
Wow. Can you describe the difference between random coincidences and true synchronicity?
The key difference is meaning. A coincidence might be seeing two red cars in a row. That's just probability. But synchronicity carries a personal significance that speaks directly to your current life situation or inner state. For instance, if you're struggling with a decision about your career, and suddenly you keep encountering people or situations that provide insight into that exact challenge, that's synchronicity at work.
That reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about spiritual breadcrumbs. Could you elaborate on that beautiful metaphor?
Think of it as the universe leaving little clues along your path. Just like in the story of Hansel and Gretel, these breadcrumbs are guiding markers. But instead of leading home, they're leading you to your authentic self.
For our listeners who might be skeptical about this concept, what would you say to them?
I'd encourage them to simply experiment with awareness. You don't have to believe in anything metaphysical. Just try keeping track of meaningful coincidences for a month. See what patterns emerge. The evidence of your own experience is the most convincing teacher.
That's such practical advice. Speaking of patterns, have you noticed any particular types of synchronicities that tend to show up more frequently in people's lives?
Yes, actually, we mentioned a few of these. Common ones include repeatedly seeing certain numbers, running into people who have messages you need to hear, or finding answers to your questions through seemingly random sources, like opening a book to exactly the right page.
You mentioned the journaling practice earlier. Could you share some specific tips for someone who wants to start tracking these meaningful patterns in their life?
The first step is to create a simple daily practice. I recommend setting aside just 5 minutes each evening to reflect on your day. Note anything that felt meaningful or caught your attention in an unusual way. Include 3 key elements: what happened, what you were thinking or feeling at the time, and any potential significance you sense. Don't worry about being certain, just record your impressions.
That sounds very doable. Are there any common obstacles people might encounter when they start this practice?
One of the biggest challenges is the tendency to dismiss these experiences as just coincidence. Another is getting too analytical rather than staying open to the experience. It's about finding that balance between awareness and overthinking.
How do you recommend maintaining that balance?
I encourage people to approach it with a sense of playful curiosity. Think of yourself as a detective gathering clues rather than someone who needs to solve everything immediately. Sometimes the meaning of a synchronicity only becomes clear weeks or months later.
That's such helpful advice. Thinking back to your own journey, from losing your singing voice to discovering these spiritual connections, how has your relationship with synchronicity evolved?
It's evolved from something that happened to me to something I actively engage with. Now, instead of seeing my voice loss as just a tragedy, I understand it as a profound turning point that opened me to a different way of listening. Not just to music, but to the subtle messages life is constantly offering us.
That's beautiful. It really illustrates how our greatest challenges can become doorways to unexpected gifts. What would you say to someone who might be going through their own version of losing their voice right now?
I would tell them that sometimes what feels like an ending is actually an invitation to a deeper beginning. Start paying attention to the small signs and coincidences around you. They might be showing you a new path you never considered.
Your journey really highlights how being open to synchronicity can transform our perspective on life's challenges. Are there any final practices or insights you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes, I encourage everyone to start their day with what I call synchronicity awareness. Simply set an intention in the morning to notice meaningful connections. You might be amazed at what begins to appear. And remember, synchronicities often show up in ways we don't expect. Sometimes they come through challenges or apparent obstacles. The key is staying open to the possibility that every experience might be carrying a message.
That's such a powerful reminder. Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear what's the most unexpected way synchronicity has shown up in your life recently?
actually being here. Just yesterday, I was thinking, I just launched this Essentially Soulful podcast, and having recorded a few episodes, I knew I needed to share more personally with my audience. At that moment, a book fell off my side table. Sacred Spaces is the title. I wrote a chapter in the book about losing my voice. I knew when the book hit the floor, that was the story I needed to tell today.
What a perfect note to end on. DeeAnna, thank you for sharing your incredible journey with us today.
Thank you, Betty. This has been wonderful. I'll be sure to add the book information and other resources to the show notes.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration of synchronicity and transformation. Remember, sometimes losing your voice might just help you find a whole new way of being heard. Until next time, stay mindful of those meaningful coincidences in your life. They might just be showing you the way forward. This is Betty, signing off from Essentially Soulful.